Lewis Hamilton has just delivered one of the most painful sprint performances of his Ferrari career, and Frederic Vasseur has reached the limit of his patience after seeing how a single setup gamble destroyed Hamilton's entire Qatar weekend. The internal analysis confirms Hamilton finished 17th, more than 46 seconds behind Oscar Piastri, after being forced to start from the pit lane because Ferrari broke park firm in a desperate attempt to repair the SF25. The radio messages reveal a driver who has gone from frustration to total resignation, telling the team the car will not go any faster and responding to questions with sarcasm instead of feedback. Before we break down every detail of this disaster, make sure you subscribe right now, because Qatar has exposed a collapse inside Ferrari that Vasseur can no longer ignore. The Qatar sprint confirmed that Hamilton's weekend unraveled the moment he chose a high downforce setup on Friday. Ferrari believed this configuration might stabilize the SF25 through the long corners of Lusail, but the leaked data shows it created more drag than expected while delivering none of the rotation Hamilton needed. As a result, he failed to escape SQ1 and placed himself in an impossible position heading into Saturday. Ferrari faced an urgent choice overnight, and the decision they made sent Hamilton's weekend into full crisis. Ferrari abandoned the original setup, completely switching to a lower downforce rear wing and adjusting suspension stiffness to address chronic understeer in Sector 2. These changes broke park firm immediately and locked Hamilton into a pit lane start for the sprint. The team knew the sprint was now a test session rather than a competitive opportunity. The goal shifted from points to survival and data collection, exposing how far from the performance window Ferrari had fallen. Even with clean air early on the SF25, simply refused to generate the speed needed to attack the midfield. The performance analysis makes the situation even more alarming. Hamilton's car remained one of the slowest machines in the field through the 150 to 200 km/h corners that define Lusail. The GPS data shows he lost time in every high-speed phase and could not carry the momentum required to build acceleration onto the straights. Even with the lower downforce wing, the SF25 lacked both grip and stability. Hamilton was running effectively alone on track, yet still unable to match the pace of cars deep in the midfield. By the midpoint of the sprint, Hamilton had overtaken only the other pit lane starters and never posed a threat to the pack ahead. Williams, Haas, and Sauber were out of reach because Ferrari lacked the top speed to close the gap and the mechanical grip to stay close in dirty air. The leaked report describes the sprint as a controlled test disguised as a race, and the final result reflects that reality. Hamilton finished 17th with no path forward and no competitive leverage. The radio messages reflect a driver caught in a downward spiral. On Friday, Hamilton told the team the car will not go any faster, which was a rare admission of resignation instead of anger. During the sprint, the radio was almost silent, filled only with necessary instructions. Hamilton no longer believed the SF25 could respond to adjustments because the car's problems were not situational but structural. When asked if there was anything positive to take away, he replied the weather is nice, a clear signal of a driver who has lost trust in the machinery. Ferrari's internal comparison with Charles Leclerc confirms why Vasseur is furious. Leclerc started 9th but fell to 13th after running wide at turn 2 and spent the rest of the sprint trapped in AD, our S-train, unable to pass slower cars. This highlights the core issue. The SF25 lacks top speed to attack and lacks stability to follow. Hamilton, starting from the pit lane, made the situation appear even worse, but the data shows that both Ferrari drivers were victims of the same flawed package. The final consequence of the sprint is the impact on Sunday's Grand Prix. Ferrari now faces a situation where points are only possible if the race becomes chaotic. The setup they validated is more logical but still slow, and Hamilton may end up starting from 18th again, depending on further changes. Vasseur knows the team cannot afford another collapse, yet the SF25 remains one of the weakest cars at this circuit. With rivals gaining momentum and Ferrari losing direction, Hamilton enters the Grand Prix with his weekend already in jeopardy. Ferrari arrived at the Qatar sprint already facing a structural deficit because the SF25 never connected with the demands of the Lusail circuit. The initial high downforce setup chosen for Friday qualifying left Hamilton with a car that dragged heavily down the straights while still refusing to rotate through the long corners that shaped the lap. The combination of excess drag and front-end reluctance meant Hamilton could neither defend nor attack. This mismatch pushed him out of SQ1 and placed the entire weight of recovery on a car that simply was not delivering the mechanical or aerodynamic support he needed. The overnight changes Ferrari applied created the second layer of the problem. In an attempt to correct the lack of rotation, engineers removed rear wing load and stiffened mechanical elements to change the way the car responded mid-corner. These changes immediately violated park firm conditions and forced Hamilton to start from the pit lane. Even before the sprint began, the problem was clear. Ferrari had sacrificed grid position in exchange for a theoretical improvement that had no guarantee of working. Starting behind every car on the grid magnified the weaknesses of the SF25 and turned the sprint into a rescue mission rather than a race. Once the sprint started, the true scale of the problem became obvious. In clean air at the start, Hamilton should have been able to extract predictable pace from the car, yet the analysis shows that even without traffic, he struggled to generate competitive speed. The SF25 remained one of the slowest cars on track through the critical 150 to 200 km/h corners. These sections form the heart of the Qatar layout, and Hamilton could not carry enough minimum speed to build momentum. This left him exposed on exit and prevented any opportunity to close gaps before the straights. The next issue appeared when Hamilton reached traffic. The sprint format offers no pit stops, no tire offsets, and no strategic tools to escape a slow phase of the race. The Ferrari lacked the top speed to pass without DRS and lacked the stability to remain close enough to activate it. This trapped Hamilton behind cars that were slower on paper but more efficient in the key phases of the lap. He could approach in corner entry but lost grip mid-corner and lost traction on exit. The cycle repeated lap after lap, leaving him locked in a fixed position that he could not break through. The radio messages reveal another dimension of the problem. Hamilton communicated with a tone closer to resignation than frustration. When he told the team the car will not go any faster, he was acknowledging a deeper issue. He no longer believed the SF25 was offering any margin for improvement. During the sprint, he gave almost no feedback because there were no adjustments available and because the car's behavior was fundamentally disconnected from his inputs. This lack of communication underscored that Hamilton had lost trust in the setup and the direction of the weekend. The comparison with Charles Leclerc demonstrated that the problem extended beyond Hamilton's side of the garage. Leclerc started ninth, yet fell backward immediately after running wide in turn 2 and could not recover. He spent the entire sprint locked inside our S-line with no ability to attack cars that should have been slower. This parallel failure confirmed that the SF25 was not struggling in isolated scenarios. Both drivers faced the same aerodynamic inefficiency and the same lack of stability. This reinforced to Vasseur that the issues were structural and not the result of driver error. The final element of the problem is the momentum loss heading into Sunday. Hamilton's 17th place finish delivered no competitive benefit and provided only limited data for the Grand Prix. The car remained inconsistent, and the pace remained outside the points scoring range. Ferrari now faces a race where they must rely on external circumstances rather than performance. With rivals improving and the SF25 struggling to match even midfield stability, Hamilton enters the Grand Prix facing one of his most difficult weekends of the season. Ferrari's engineering group entered the Qatar sprint under extreme internal pressure because the team had committed to a complete overnight rebuild of the SF25 without any opportunity to validate the new configuration on track. The decision to abandon the high downforce setup and switch to reduced rear wing load was made on incomplete data and simulation projections rather than confirmed readings. The engineers understood that if their predictions were even slightly incorrect, Hamilton would be locked into a car that could not be improved for the remainder of the weekend. This uncertainty shaped every call made through the night and opened the door to the pit lane start that defined the sprint. The shift to a lower downforce configuration demanded a precise rebalancing of the entire aerodynamic platform. By removing rear load, Ferrari expected more rotation in the medium and high-speed corners, but this change also altered how the floor generated stability under lateral compression. The leaked analysis shows that engineers attempted to compensate through suspension stiffness adjustments, but the mechanical and aerodynamic systems never aligned. The SF25 gained marginal straight-line efficiency, but continued to lose mid-corner stability. This failure to synchronize the platform forced engineers into a reactive role with no remaining tools to correct the imbalance. Starting from the pit lane added another engineering burden. Because park firm regulations were broken, Ferrari no longer had access to incremental tuning. Every change had to be final and locked in. This meant that the sprint became the only real-world test to understand how the new configuration behaved once temperatures, tire loads, and wind variation came into play. Engineers had to observe Hamilton's telemetry in real time and make sense of a car that had not completed a single meaningful lap before the race. The sprint therefore shifted from a points chase to an engineering diagnostic exercise carried out under competitive conditions. Another major pressure point came from the SF25's poor performance in the mid-speed range. The internal data showed that Hamilton was losing critical time in corners that should have suited a lighter rear wing. Engineers tried to determine whether the cause was aerodynamic imbalance or mechanical grip loss. The conclusions were troubling. The car lacked sufficient mechanical support to take advantage of the increased rotation expected from a reduced wing level. That mismatch meant the platform could not hold load consistently and forced Hamilton to slow more than planned. Engineers were left without any immediate solution because the weakness involved the full chassis architecture. Communication between driver and engineers became another source of pressure. Hamilton's radio responses remained short and restrained, a clear difference from his normally analytical communication style. The team needed feedback to determine whether the car was suffering from aero washout or traction instability, yet the driver had reached the point where he believed the car was too inconsistent to evaluate meaningfully. This placed the engineers in an information vacuum at the exact moment they required clarity. They had to rely entirely on telemetry to interpret behavior rather than combining it with Hamilton's observations, which limited the accuracy of their assessments. The comparison with Leclerc's race created further engineering tension. Although Leclerc began from a far stronger position the moment he ran wide in turn 2, he was unable to recover. Engineers saw that Leclerc's data suffered from the same front limit grip loss and straight line inefficiency that Hamilton experienced. This removed any possibility that Hamilton's pace issues were tied to unique conditions on his side of the garage. The duplicated symptoms confirmed that the SF25 was fundamentally mismatched to the demands of Lusail. This made the engineering group realize that every adjustment they applied was treating symptoms rather than solving the core limitation of the chassis.